First of all, thank you everybody for joining us today. It means a lot to us. Quick housekeeping. There is a QA panel in Zoom. If you would just use that, that'd be great to pose some questions in. Actually, I prefer chat. If you're in the chat, I'll be monitoring chat and talking to Jackson and Chris at the same time. And I know Dev is on the line as well. So we'll be engaged with you in chat. So please do use that. And then we'll record this. It'll absolutely be available after the event. I know the team is very quick to get everything up on the Cockroach Labs YouTube channel. And I'm sure this will land there within the next couple hours if this is valuable and you want to share it with somebody else. So, or you just want to see something great that Chris or Jackson said, not me, but that's a whole other story. So as with everything we do around here at Cockroach Labs, when we have a webinar, again, use the chat and QA. I think I'm going to ask Deb to be the judge of the best question of the day. The best question of the day gets this mug. I have mine, but it's in the dishwasher. I would have played it out for everybody, but they're actually kind of nice. And Jackson and Chris, you guys are going to get mugs, I think, just for being guests, for hanging out with us today. So, my name is Jim Walker. I am I do product marketing here at Cockroach Labs. Again, I've been involved in open source in lots of different ways, but I'm honored to have these guys and to have a conversation with Chris and Jackson. So, Chris, can we just start with you? Just give an introduction of who you are. We'll come back to like how you got involved in open source, but who are you and what do you do here at Cockroach Labs?
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Chris Seto. I'm a site reliability engineer here at Cockroach Labs on the Cockroach Cloud team. We run all the cloud service offerings here and we put out fires, I guess is probably the easiest way to describe my job.
And how long have you been at Cockroach Labs, Chris?
Been here a little bit more than a year now.
Yeah. Oh man, you're an old timer. It's like some legacy stuff back there a year ago. So, and then Jackson, you are not SRE manager. I'm sorry, that's a total misstep on I was doing this very quickly. You're definitely not Chris's manager, are you?
No, I'm not. Hey everybody, I'm Jackson. I'm an engineer on the storage team, which is lowest layer of CockroachDB, working on Pebble mostly, which is our storage engine.
Mm-hmm. And I think I think right now, Chris or Jackson, we just announced. I think we just published a blog post about Pebble, didn't we? Last hour, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, Pebble being if people are out there and they're familiar with RocksDB, which is kind of a KV store, that's what we've used for quite some time underneath the covers of Cockroach Database. And we had actually built out a wholly new layer in open source, by the way, right, Jackson? Right?
Yeah, completely open source.
All in Go, correct?
Yep, all in Go.
So pretty awesome. So pushing the limits of Golang and all in open source. So, but we'll talk a little bit about that. So again, this is not the end. I just wanted to do this. I want to stop sharing and just have just us up here. So. Again, my name is Jim. I've been in open source for really quite some time. I've been part of some fairly good open source companies. I was at a company called Talend, which was really where I started kind of getting involved. That was 2008, 2009. They're a public company. I was at a company called Hortonworks, which was driving Hadoop. They went through an IPO and then they were bought by another open source company called Cloudera. I was at a company called CoreOS, which was, driving container Linux and the whole move towards Kubernetes. And so I'm an advocate. I love open source and I love product marketing because I get to actually help, developers and people who are coding in the open tell these great stories about value and what you all do. So I'm honored to have you. Thank you guys for joining. But to just get this conversation started, let's just start at the beginning and I'll ask both of you, Chris and Jackson, and probably going to be the same answer, but if I asked you, Chris, to define open source, how do you define open source? Let's just start there before we talk about getting involved, right?
Ooh, that's a good one. I guess for me, open source is just having the ability to view the source code, ideally with like some form of documentation of any given software. So as long as it is publicly accessible, I don't have to ideally sign up for any accounts or go through any paywalls or anything to just see what is actually running under the hood.
Right. Ideally with documentation. I really like that caveat. That actually makes a whole lot of sense. And Jackson, how about you? How do you define open source? Is it much different or?
I think it's about the same. And then I would say I usually have an expectation that it's like able to be used by the public in some capacity. Yeah.
I always joke about the the license is actually pretty important when it comes to open source, and there's been a whole, we aren't going to talk about licenses today. That's a wholly other topic, right? But being able to freely use it, I think is hugely important. I think the third part that I would add, and you guys, I love that we just worked off each other. There's code, there's consumption, which I think is what you're talking about, Jackson. I always think about community. And the reason I like to be involved in open source is just kind of all the great people that I've met who share kind of a common vibe about, what we're all interested in. So that's what I find to be really, really cool. So I always think about code contribution, code consumption, and community, I think. So, but Jackson, you've been involved with open source for really quite some time, right? How did you first get involved, or how did you first kind of, open your eyes to open source and open source communities?
So I actually started, open source was kind of my entry into programming. I wanted to use a message board software when I was young, and I found one that was free and open source, and I got involved actually in the community first as a user and like as someone who was like helping other people use the product, and then I was kind of inspired by the project because it was very useful to me, and I enjoyed like partaking in the community, and so then I wanted to like contribute even more, and that was kind of my entry into programming. And yeah.
What was the bulletin board? Do you remember the name of the project?
It was WTCBB.
Great name.
And no longer.
That's why y'all need marketers, like it works out.
Yeah, it's now defunct, but yeah, it was a great piece of software at the time.
And are you still friends with people in that community, Jackson? I mean, you're still do you still know people?
There's one person who we're not too close anymore, but we definitely keep tabs on each other because we both work within the open source community, and like it's great to like see what he's up to now. And, yeah,
that's cool. If I go all the way back to when I first got introduced to open source, so you guys, this is totally aging me, and I'm sorry, but I coded in a language called Smalltalk back in the 90s when I coded. And Smalltalk was this beautiful language. And there was this company called Park Place, and Park was Palo Alto Research Center. So like Xerox PARC created Windows, they created the mouse. The language that came out of this group was this language Smalltalk. It was really cool. And at the time there was a huge community of people, and I'm still involved with people that were part of that community. It's years later, which is kind of cool. Actually, Kent Beck was kind of circling around that group, and the whole extreme programming came out of that whole, and it was just so much fun. So, but here we are years and years later, this stuff doesn't go away. So Chris, how did you first get involved in open source?
Yeah, the first company I ever worked for was developing a open source product. Our mission statement was to increase the openness and reproducibility of scientific studies, and we kind of followed that mantra by developing open source tools to do so. And kind of as an aside, that's actually how I found out about Cockroach Labs too, is we ended up using a open source library from Ben Darnell, and we became huge fans of him there and saw that he had started another company.
Yeah, I think it's one of the cool things about this company. Like it's people ask us about open core and CockroachDB core, and that's open source, and it's, you can freely use it and all that stuff. I find the code repositories to be very interesting as well. I think people look to some of the things that we're doing from a distributed systems point of view to get inspired. I think some of the stuff that we've done are like, I don't know, are you guys familiar with what we did around parallel commits, that stuff? I mean, there's some really awesome software engineering going on. So it's really cool. And I think one of our other, do you guys know that Spencer and Peter, our two of the other co-founders, started an open source project called GIMP, a tool called GIMP? You guys, and everybody still knows GIMP, right? Like that's not dead, right? That's still going on. So yeah. So, I mean, our roots go way back. And if anybody hasn't ever used GIMP, people around the phone, go check it out, because that thing, I think they built it. Peter and Spencer built that in their dorm room, I think in the 90s, and that thing is still going on. So here we are, you know, years later. So, so Jackson, back to you. You know, we, as prep to this, you know, we talked about, you know, projects and doing things in open source. And I think the work that you're doing around Pebble inspired you to create a project as well, that as part of COVID, I know you're humble and you don't want to say it blew up, but what was your project over the past couple of months that like blew up, right? Like it kind of was a good example.
Yeah, so there's this project that I created called Horse-Based, and it's open source, and it's a web app in order to play the board game Codenames. And I actually had originally created it a few years ago, and then I adapted it to use Pebble recently, but around the time that COVID hit, like March, April, it started seeing a lot of traffic as people were quarantining and they wanted to like connect with each other, but couldn't do it in person. And yeah, it was really cool seeing a project take off like that in real time, because it's always great to have your software be used by people. And then it's also great to see the contributions, because there's a lot of activity, not just like on the hosted version, but in the GitHub repo.
Really?
Great.
How many stars on that GitHub repo?
It's like 400 or 500.
It's not bad, dude. It's
Yeah.
not bad at all for you. And how did you go about getting people interested in it? I mean, like, I think there was probably a couple other things going on macro level, but like, did you do anything at all, Jackson, or it just kind of just naturally happened?
It was pretty natural growth, I think. So I had told my friends, and I played some with my friends, and then there was some like just growth among like adjacent communities. And then I think, yeah, in March and April, it was kind of just organic growth from there. Yeah, which is cool to see. Yeah.
So basically there's people that were kind of good audience because they had nowhere else to go, basically.
Yeah.
Did you get involved? I mean, were there any like bulletin boards, or was there anything that you had conversations about it that kind of helped kind of spur along, you know, its popularity?
So I had written a blog post on my personal blog, and that was something. And then I think I shared, when I first created the project, I shared something on Board Game Geek, which is a bulletin board that's kind of related, and some people on there checked it out.
Yeah. So what are the other people doing around this like how are people contributing? Is it like, cause it's a pretty simple code base, right? I mean, I looked at it and hey, look, like I said, I haven't coded in years, but I got it, like, to the most part. What are some of the things that people are actually contributing?
Yeah, so it's been a mix. There have been some features. So adding things like timers for turns, kind of like chess. And there's also been quite a bit of language contributions, because COVID was an international pandemic, and a lot of people are familiar with Codenames and want to play it. And so not everyone who's contributed has been a programmer. Like, I've gotten emails, like, for example, a woman in Italy emailed me a list of Italian words so that she could play with her grandmother who lived in Sicily during the pandemic. Right. And yeah, it's pretty cool to see that involvement. And yeah.
That's cool. Chris, what did you involve in? Did you contribute to this project or what, dude? You're just sitting on this. I mean,
unfortunately, I did not. I played it many times though, and we were thrilled to find out that someone from Cockroach was actually the developer of it.
That's kind of wild. So you didn't even know that Jackson was the developer and you were already playing it, and so it was built off of something like somebody sits. well, used to sit
Yeah,
next to.
someone just kind of came in through the Slack channel and was like, hey, who wants to do a team building game? We'll play code names. And then like a week or so later, someone had mentioned, it was like, oh yeah, by the way, you guys know Jackson, right?
Right.
Made this.
By the way, yeah, that's awesome.
Right.
So that's cool. Chris, how much was the open source angle? And like, you have a history in open source, right? You've had like, that's how you got into this. How much of that was part of you joining Cockroach Labs? Your interest, but then also as part of the interview process and as part of like us getting to know you as well. Was that part of the conversation?
Honestly, I don't think it was that much of a conversation. There was definitely some things that I could point on my GitHub repo to make it a little bit easier to scope me out.
Right.
But it really helped with my engagement with Cockroach. I kind of had a gap in my employment at one point. I was just taking a break and spent some time working on some of the starter bugs for Cockroach actually to kind of get my feet wet.
Interesting. So you were already involved with Cockroach before you even got here? Because
very minorly, but yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, you guys are the most humble people, because I'm going to ask Jackson. I'm going to come back to Jackson actually, because I want to get into this humility thing and developers, you people, I'm telling you. Jackson, how many people use code names on the planet?
I guess the peak traffic was like 1.5 million in a month.
Yeah, that's small little project. Wild. Like, I mean, it just goes to show you how quickly open source can go crazy. Being in the right place at the right time, having an interesting code base, doing something that is honestly, you were into it too, right? I mean, that like following something you like to do and getting it out there, I think is, and not with a whole lot, it just kind of took off, which is kind of wild. So it's awesome. So, Chris, how did you find Cockroach in the first place?
This was through, again, Ben Darnell. We were using the Tornado library pretty extensively and had, I guess, developed a relationship and just going back and forth between some of the difficulties we faced with actually the transitions between Python 2 and going to, 3 and going to 3.4. And after that, we kind of watched his GitHub, honestly, because he just had so many good libraries popping up for debugging things in Python. And eventually we saw contributions to Cockroach Labs and it was like, that's a really cool company. I want to work there one day. That's
awesome. So you basically found us via open source.
Yeah, entirely.
Long story short, right? Like, and I think, lesson learned for everybody, get involved, because you end up meeting people like Ben Darnell, who, I don't know about you guys, but you meet a few engineers in your life that are of that caliber. Ben functions on another level. I just think he actually talks in code sometimes almost, you know what I mean? So yeah, but you start meeting some really cool people. Some of the people that I've grown to really care for in my life are, like, there's a guy named Owen O'Malley who built HDFS, which was the underlying file structure for Hadoop. And I remember I worked with Owen and like, talk about humble, you guys. Like, he was working with JPL, I believe, or he was working with remember when the Mars rover went down? It was on Mars and it was like stuck. And like, they couldn't get it to sort out or whatever. And like, they called up, Owens is one of the people they called. He went over there and he debugged it and he figured it out, right? And they fixed it. And I'm like, Owen, you fixed the Mars rover. He's like, no. I just fixed the scheduler. I'm like, okay, dude. Yeah, right. So, but you end up, this is one of the reasons I love open source communities and getting involved. And I'm so happy that people are on the phone, like, trying to figure out how to get involved, because to me, some of the best people I've met and some of the most interesting conversations I've had have all been because of, my involvement in communities, which is exactly, I mean, Chris, you joined us because of a community. Jackson, like, building a community like that and then having like a whole bunch of peers actually use that's kind of cool, right? So, how, if you guys were to give advice to people that were listening, how do you get involved? Like, how do you, find a project, and then what do you do? What do you look for, right? Like, I don't know, let's start with you, Chris.
Let's see. I think the majority of times that I've contributed to a open source repository have been using the software to do something either professionally or personally, and just stumbling across various things or finding bugs and then just trying to fix it so that the rest of the world doesn't have to deal with that. Or when you see a certain error message, there's just a GitHub issue that has the solution in there.
Right. How do you get past the whole, you guys, I struggle with this. How do you get past the imposter syndrome? Like, are you good enough to contribute to this community? I think people deal with that. I don't know if Jackson or Chris, I don't know if you guys ever dealt with it. You guys are pretty Rockstar coders, but have you guys ever dealt with that? Is it kind of like I'm shy, so that happens to me. I don't know. Either of you, Jackson?
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that before. I think it can be really intimidating, especially like if it's a large project, large code base, large community. It can be hard as like a newbie in the community. And I think sometimes communities are aware of this, and they'll label things as like a good first issue, and I feel like that that can be really helpful. So if you're interested in a project that has that, like that's a good thing to look for. Yeah, I think also just starting small can help. Like little documentation updates like are really important, and they like you can have the confidence in your change, even just like if it's a misspelling that you're correcting.
Right. Yeah, and I think I contributed to Hadoop. Every one of them was like grammar and punctuation and spelling. Like, yeah, I didn't write any Java, but hey, it was actually important because all that helps. Like as you said, Chris, like an open source project, hopefully with documentation, is usually pretty good, right? So, how would you suggest people get started, Chris?
I kind of focus on what is lacking. So again, finding a bug that hasn't been solved just yet, and just again, that's kind of the glory of open source code, is you can just kind of root through it and look for what's actually happening, find where things are breaking, and see if you can't fix that and send it back up to the maintainers.
Right. I mean, there's always an issue, right? I think one of the things I pulled away from you, Jackson, is like maybe you're involved in a project and they don't have levels of issues like beginner, intermediate, advanced issue. Like helping projects figure that out, I think is a big thing. Like what a huge contribution that is to a project, because it gets, helping build momentum and community and more people involved, I think is a really good way of doing these things. And it doesn't take like rockstar, PhD level code to help with projects. And I think that's one of those things that, I don't know, I was always intimidated because I was always worried my code wasn't like elegant or beautiful. I wasn't writing poetry. So I don't know. So if you guys wanted to start an open source project today, like Jackson, you did this most recently, right? And so like, if you were to just give people advice like on what to do, I mean, what's step one, and then what's step three? I guess we'll mix up that a little bit. This is a good question. I like throwing a little curveball of a question to developers. Like, wait, where's step two? You got to debug
that. I guess step one is probably finding something that you really care about, because I think when you're starting a new project, like it's really important that it matters to you, and that you want to see it through. And I think that's like the most important thing to making it successful as a project. Yeah, step three, I think is probably like finding your community in order to really like make the project successful. Because yeah, like the beauty of open source is that it is the product of a whole community, and yeah, that's how you like create really terrific software.
And even if you don't get to step three, there's a step two in there somewhere. So you guys, I did not mean to do this, but Chris, what would you think step two is? What's between finding your bliss and building a community?
I mean, step two is just putting the code out there. Right?
That's right.
Just push it up somewhere, get people interested. At the very least, Google will index it for you. Yeah. Get some keywords in there for like, this solves this bug, or this addresses this problem, or even better yet, this is how you can connect with your friends.
Yeah. And I think that's a big thing. Finding your bliss, finding like-minded people that can actually help, and then building a community around it. Building communities is not easy, you guys. It's simply not. It's, how you find these people. And it's, for me, it's going to conferences and talking to people, and like actually being being a human is somehow how it is. So That was all the topics that you guys, anything else you wanted to throw in about open source and in general? I mean, I think we covered like all the things we wanted to talk about. We talked about your background, how to get involved, where to look for things, how to start a project, right? Anything else? It's pretty, that was all of it, right? So I will actually, I think there's other ways to get involved in open source too. You guys, I haven't coded in 20 years, and I would say I'm pretty involved in open source. I'm part of the community. I'm part of the conversation. I guess I've contributed comments and stuff, but does that really, it counts. It counts. And I think there's lots of other ways. Dev, who is on the phone with us today, who you might see his picture as well. Dev, would you say you're involved in open source?
Yeah, I'd say I'll put my video on. Hello, everyone.
Good. You should be. I love you, buddy. And you should be on this because you are involved.
I'd say that, part of what I do is try to encourage people who want to work for Cockroach Labs as part of recruiting is to get them involved in the repository. Not only that, but our open source interview process is entirely run and shared on GitHub. Right. So I'm a GitHub user because I update that.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. We have an entirely open source interview process. So as part of the interview process here at Cockroach Labs, you have full visibility in what you're going to go through with all of the interview sessions, right? I found it incredible. I don't know about you guys. I think I saw Jackson nodding his head. Everybody I know that goes through this process loves it. I would encourage every company, and if you're on the phone right now, you're at a company, I would encourage it because I think it gets the best answers, right? I mean, it's like anything with open source. You end up getting like being upfront. It really works well, right? So, and we've been doing that since the beginning, right, Dev? I think we have a blog post on that too, right?
Yeah, it's been at least 3 or 4 years. You can check that out. And also people actually, leave comments, ask questions, engage with us because they've learned about our interview process through that.
Yeah.
It's paid dividends in terms of networking and communicating with other companies too.
Yeah.
Any questions about open source stuff from anyone?
Right on time. My internet kind of like messed up. Sorry about that, everybody. I guess you guys, I'm sorry about my internet. There was a slight lag there. I hope you can still hear me. Dev, are you still there, buddy?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Awesome. I guess my final point is for everybody is there's lots of ways to be involved in open source. I mean, here are 2 really great examples in Chris and Jackson, and honestly, the third in Dev. I'm sorry, it's Devonair. I gotta call you Dev. So you're a Dev. You talk to devs all day long. You have the perfect name to do what you do, buddy. But I would highly encourage everybody and anybody who listens to get involved in open source. What's that, Devonair?
Oh, I just said I hope our candidates believe it too.
Exactly. So I thank you guys for joining and doing this today. I had fun. I hope you guys did too. We are an open source company. We take pride in what we do. I think there's some really great code examples out there that we're putting out. And stay tuned for lots of stuff that we're doing in our open core product that we think can be available to everybody and valuable to the world. So we are hiring. You get to talk to great people like Devonair if you're interested. And all of that is on our website at www.cockroachlabs.com. Anything else from any of y'all before I sign off? A smile at least? A wave?
So I guess I do have just kind of one real quick aside, which is in terms of ways to contribute. I was at a hackathon a while ago, PyCon actually, and there was a graphic designer going around offering to just make logos for open source repositories.
Right.
So there's really no end to the ways that you can contribute to open source and the community out there.
I really appreciate that, Chris. It is important, right? Like all that stuff is super, super important. So, all right. Who wants to say goodbye? I'm going to nominate you, Jackson, to say goodbye to everybody. All right.
Yeah. Thank you for coming, everyone, and goodbye.
Awesome. Bye, everybody. See, that was open source. That was a committee. I love it.